something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware.
I first deployed to Thailand, flying B-52s out of Utapao in 1971. I flew 50 missions. I came home, went back on nuclear alert with B-52s in Blytheville, Arkansas. And then in the summer of 1972, Operation Bullet Shot started, which moved all the G models over to the theater. So our whole wing flew over to Guam, to Anderson Air Force Base in Guam, and started flying combat out of there. Thailand was a 4-hour round trip. Excuse me. Anderson was 13 hours round trip from the middle of the Pacific out to South Vietnam and Cambodia and back again. So I was on my, so I was scheduled to rotate home on the 18th of December 1972, and on the 15th they canceled rotations, and on the 18th Linebacker 2 started. And so we flew the first night as a wave lead of the third wave. The D models went out first, then the G's started, and we were number 19 in the train of G models. Excuse me. And heading to.
I found this on the web.
Who are you talking to? Oh, Siri heard me talk about Anderson Air Force Base. I didn't know she was listening. This is very scary. So we took off and flew the mission. It was a difficult mission because of a variety of things that came up that happened. There was some flight planning issues that we had to correct. There were position issues we had to be concerned about, timing. There was a jet stream that was coming across North Vietnam from the northwest, and we would be entering the jet stream as we started the bomb run with about a 90-knot tailwind. So as the navigator, my job was to make sure we got there exactly on time after 8 hours and 40 minutes of flying. And so as we approached the target, everything was working perfectly well, the bombing system, the crew was well coordinated, and just short of the bomb release point, we were hit by the first of what turned out to be 2 surface-to-air missiles. The missiles don't hit the airplanes, they blow up near the airplane, and the shrapnel comes out like a shotgun blast, so that big chunks of steel from the missile tear through the airplane, started fires, and destroyed 2 to 4 engines on the port side, the left side, tore through the airplane, killed the gunner, mortally wounded the pilot, started a fire behind the nav position, which was right in front of the bomb bay and right below the main mid-body fuel tank. So we were close enough to the bomb release point to get the bombs out, but the fire into that fuel tank was a big concern, and so it's time to leave. And so the ejection started uncontrolled. The defense officer left first, and the pilot and I went out. He went up, I went down. The navigator bombardier, the offense team, go down in that airplane. Everybody else goes up. And what I discovered years later was that there was a KC-135 Stratotanker over the Gulf of Tonkin in refueling orbit that was piloted by my brother. So he saw the airplane get hit, go catch fire, and go down. And so I ejected basically at the bomb release point, number 19, with 8 more behind me at 15-second intervals, dropping bombs in that same hole. 35,000 feet, free fell to 15,000. Then the parachute started opening automatically at 15,000, and when it opened, I was hanging right over the target. As I looked down, I could see bombs blowing up right between my feet, 14,000 feet down. So I was able to tilt the parachute so that it drifted off to the west and then eventually touched down on the edge of a plowed field and rolled into a ditch and scrambled down the ditch for a ways, looking for a place to hide, but there was no place to hide, and I was surrounded basically by a bunch of civilians who were not very happy with me for dropping in on them like that unannounced. And fortunately, 4 militiamen were there and protected me from the angry civilians. And I was searched, basically stripped to my skivvies, tied up, blindfolded, and walked to one of 3 or 4 villages before we finally got to a road, and another one of my crew members, who was the defense officer, and I were put together, and we put on a truck and taken into Hanoi. Spent 100 days there, waiting for the C-141 to come in and take us home.
So talk to us about that. It was Hang Lo, right? Was the name of the facility?
The Wallow, yeah, what we
Wallow.
call the Hanoi Hilton.
Hanoi Hilton, right.
And we were in the Hilton for about a month and then moved over to another prison that we called the Zoo, or the Kulak prison.
Tell us about that. I mean, we've heard stories. You lived it.
A lot of the story, well, by the time we were captured, the torture had ended basically as soon as Ho Chi Minh had died. But several things happened about the same time. The Son Tay raid happened, which so upset the North Vietnamese, they moved most of the prisoners out of the outlying camps and into the 3 in town, the Wallow, the Kulak, and what we call the plantation. And so no more torture and no more isolation. So when I was captured, I was put first into an interrogation room just inside the Wallow prison. And I was alone only about a day, about 24 hours. And then a bombardier from the 2nd B-52 to go down was put in with me, and he and I were together the rest of the time. We had other cellmates later, both in the Hilton and in the Zoo. It was as many as 6 or 7 guys. So we were able to talk, check notes, see what was what. Mostly it was, for the first 11 nights, it was B-52s bombing every night. So we got to listen to about 700 B-52 strikes in those 11 nights. As long as we could hear them at a distance, we were fine. They got real close on about the day after Christmas. It was really, plus they changed their tactics. So they were dropping, 3 airplanes were dropping their bombs on the same target at the same time instead of at 15-second intervals. So it wasn't drawn out. It was just big explosions. And then about mid-January, they moved us to the Zoo. At that point, we kind of got the notion that something good was happening. And within a few days, we got a message from General Flynn over at the Hilton through whatever channels messages came between prisons, had to have been a North Vietnamese runner of some sort, that camps were being reorganized in order of shoot-down date. So that's good news, because that meant they were getting ready to send us home. The 1st of February, they called us into an assembly room and told us the treaty had been signed on the 29th of January, and the releases would occur starting in 2 weeks and then every other Saturday until the end of March.
How'd that make you feel?
Short. We were short enough to walk under the doors after a while. Because we're counting down now. We knew we'd be going home in 60 days or less. And so we got a little cocky, a little more difficult to follow orders from the captors, a little more confrontive with when we didn't get decent food or didn't get adequate medical care and that sort of thing. So, And we were kind of happy. We were hoping that our families knew that we were still alive because, back in the old days, the names didn't get out until Doug Hegdahl managed to get released early under orders from us, not me, I wasn't there, but from his senior ranking officer. He was offered a quick trip home, and our rule was you go in an order shoot down date. So early releases were verboten, and he came back and talked to a senior officer, but he had memorized the names of everybody that was known to be in prison. And the North Vietnamese thought he was too stupid to do anything with because he pretended to be stupid. He had lost his glasses when he fell overboard on a boat in the Tonkin Gulf. And he was smart as a whip and passed messages all over because they let him out when nobody else was. And he had memorized the tap code. He could do it sweeping the yard. He could do it coughing, sniffing, and passing the word. And the North Vietnamese never figured that out. So when he came home, he had over 350 names, many of which were not known to be survivors. And so he was a big hero. But when I was shot down, the day after I was captured, I was taken in front of the International Press Corps. There were 6 of us, 2 from my crew, 4 from the next crew. They were taken in one at a time to this room in the plantation, and all those Europeans with cameras were out there. I thought, I'm going home. And I looked at every one of those cameras as slowly as I could to make sure everybody had a chance to get a good picture, because once it hit the wire services, there would be some explaining to do if I didn't show up at the end of the day. So I was pretty confident after that this was going well. And when the bombing stopped on the end of December, then we were all a little anxious for a couple of weeks till they reorganized us in order shoot down date. And then when the treaty was signed, that was good news. And then the day of the first release from our prison cell at the zoo, we could see the traffic pattern at the Geelong airport. And when C-130s had been coming in and out for a couple of weeks for whatever reason. But then when the C-141 came, we heard that airplane had a very distinctive engine sound. So when we heard it, we were all at the window looking out, and here's this giant 141 with a big red cross on the tail. And it was on low approach to the airport, and it missed approached and turned and came straight at us, waved his wings, and turned back around and landed. And so we were just ecstatic that the first release is going on. 2 weeks later, it didn't happen. And so we were anxious again. Then the camp radio came on and said the Americans had refused to sweep the mines out of Haiphong Harbor, and they were not going to release any more prisoners, and we figured that was a lie. And what the real story was, the North Vietnamese had about 5 or 6 guys who'd been captured in Laos, and they had said, no, those are Laotian prisoners. We're not going to release them. You have to work with Laos on that. And the U.S. said, okay, the B-52s will be back in the air tomorrow. And they changed their minds, and they went out on Monday. Then so that was the end of February, then the middle of March, and the end of March, we got new clothes. The International Press Corps, including Walter Cronkite and some other people that we knew, came through, and there was a group of guys were taken out on the 28th of March, and that was the day before I was. And then on the 29th, actually 2 airplanes came in to get the rest of us. And we flew to the Philippines.
Best flight of your life, I bet.
It was a really good flight. Really was.
Explain to us, how many people, there had to have been some dark days when you're captured. Everything gets shaken up. You're a prisoner of war. How do you get through those days? What were you thinking? It's
Well,
gotta be tough.
yeah, the first night was pretty horrible. I mean, I wasn't killed, which surprised me. There were a couple of times during the transit I thought I was going to be killed, and the civilians certainly wanted to get their hands on me. And then once I got into the Wallow prison, when I saw that big arch, I thought we're home safe now. And then I was interrogated all night, and the interrogation was straight out of the playbook from survival school, where we were trained to be POWs in Fairchild Air Force Base in Washington State. They threatened us. They would threaten me with taking me where the B-52s were bombing if I didn't answer their questions. And I thought, I don't think they want to go out there. So I wasn't real concerned about that. I lied and cheated and stole to make sure that I didn't give them any reasonable answers to their questions. I kept saying, look, I'm just a celestial navigator. All I do is navigate airplanes over water. And then when we get over land, the radar navigator takes over, and I don't have anything else to do. They said, we know you know. You're a young man. You're plenty smart. You tell us what we want to know. We'll take you where the B-52s are bombing. What I didn't know, at some point that they'd captured the radar navigator bombardier off the second airplane, who was would be my cellmate. And he said, yeah, they told me the same thing. He said, you're an old man. You're plenty wise. And I told him, look, I've been operating this equipment for nearly 20 years, and I don't remember the details of the frequencies and all that sort of thing. If you want to know radar frequencies, and you need to find a young navigator right out of school, he'll know. And I'd say, no, you need to ask a bombardier, a radar navigator, he'll know. And they were back and forth between us and didn't like our answers. We had a bad attitude.
How was prison life?
Boring, for the most part. We were fed 3 times a day except on Sundays, which was a guard's day off, apparently. We get 2 meals on Sundays. Breakfast was generally a half a loaf of French bread with a little extra protein in it, like bugs. Wasn't the most sanitary kitchen in the world. So half a loaf of French bread and some reconstituted powdered milk, which was very sweet. And then lunch was a bowl of cabbage soup and another half a loaf of French bread and some weak tea. And dinner was the same as lunch. The exceptions to that was on Christmas, they gave us a special meal, which included eggs and some kind of duck or chicken or something had been chopped up with a machete. It was hard to tell. And we were eating in the dark. So, so Christmas, New Year, our New Year's, their New Year's, Tet. And then after the treaty was signed, the meals changed somewhat. That we got things with soybeans in it, like cookies, and tofu, and canned sturgeon and pork and beef from Russia that we could make sandwiches out of. It's just shredded, stuff it in that French bread, and so they were trying to make us look good, get us healthy for repatriation. And then when we were at the Hilton, we were always in the cell, so we could talk. We could walk maybe 6 or 7 steps in any one direction, and that was about it. Our toilet paper was brown wrapping paper, rice paper, a little rough, so we would tear extra paper up into little rectangles to make playing cards. So it'd have something to do. Over at the zoo, then they started giving us at some point some paperback books, some propaganda magazines from China and Russia, but in English. They also would cut out articles from Stars and Stripes, the American military newspaper. And how they got Stars and Stripes in Hanoi, I don't know yet. And so then post things that they figured would be upsetting to us. One of which was the story of B-52s going down, because they told us over 50 B-52s had been shot down. And we had accounted for at least one crew member from 10 different airplanes. So we figured, and there were stories from the later guys that got shot down that some airplanes went down with no chance of survivors. Well, we started reading the clips that they'd pasted to this cardboard, we counted 10 airplanes. 5 more had been hit and didn't make successful landings, but they got over into Thailand or South Vietnam. The crews ejected and were all rescued. So at that point, we knew, from their 50 some odd airplanes, it was down to 10. And out of the 61 men on board, we had 32 survivors. So that was kind of good news. And we had 2 things to irritate the guards.
It sounds like y'all were having your way.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's Americans for you. You have to have a good sense of humor. You have to have faith in your fellow warrior, in your country, in your God, and to find that, and that your family was holding together back home. Not everybody's family did, but mine did, and looking forward to get on home as soon as we could get on that airplane.